All right, welcome back. And this is Realize Yourself, and I am your host, Mark. And in today's topic, we're going to go over psychedelics, entheogens, plant medicines, all that stuff, and why I don't recommend this for most people. Like we say, even a broken clock is right twice a day, so maybe it would help a few people. And it's the same with brain training technology, not recommended, especially for self-realization, as we'll go over here shortly. So when we talk about plant medicines, entheogens, psychedelics, they can produce powerful experiences, but they also carry real psychological, neurological, and spiritual risks. And often they get minimized in popular discourse. So we're going to go over main dangers and drawbacks. So with brainwaves, there's neurological disruption. Psychedelics like psilocybin, LSD, DMT, ayahuasca, iboga, and even strong plant medicines like salvia, peyote significantly alter brainwaves. And um, normal brainwave states, beta, logical thinking, ego structure, identity, alphas, relaxed awareness, theta, subconscious, access and dreamlike states, and deltas, the deep unconscious. So with the psychedelic impact, they all impact each drug, each plant medicine affects brainwaves, and they suppress the default mode network, or the DMN, the brain system that maintains the identity, ego, self-narrative, and psychological boundaries, which this causes ego dissolution, loss of identity, coherence, boundary collapse between self and environment, hyperassociation of neural networks, which are the brain areas communicating that normally don't. So the risk include identity destabilization, cognitive fragmentation, dissociation disorders, depersonalization, derealization, long-term perception changes, hallucinogen, persisting perception disorder. But not all brains reintegrate smoothly after this disruption. Another drawback, all this stuff is super powerful and one should really investigate the benefits and drawbacks before doing any of these super powerful compounds. So another one would be ego backlash effect, which is a psychological rebound. When the ego structure dissolves too fast or forcibly, the psyche often responds with a defensive overcompensation afterward. Some of the ego backlash patterns include spiritual narcissism, I'm awakened, others are asleep, messiah complexes, identity inflation, superiority delusions, hyper meaning attribution, grandiosity, dependency on substances for meaning, escapism cycles, loss of groundedness in ordinary life. This happens because the ego isn't healed. It's shattered and it rebuilds defensively. And you could see this with some social media influencers that are very popular promoting this stuff without explaining the drawbacks or the dangers. And so people that do ayahuasca ceremonies every month or every 6 months that need to continuously do this is they're not going towards self-realization. They could be using it as a form of escapism, as a form of spiritual narcissism, grandiosity, identity inflation, because their identity may be connected to that. So one does not need to do any of these plant medicines or psychedelics or any of this without the smooth integration of the ego and the realization of the true self. There's a backlash, which we talked about, and it rebounds, the ego rebounds with ferocity and fierceness. And so it's when we do these natural ways that I talk about in the book and I talk about in these videos, it's a very gentle approach, which is still quick. We're not talking about instant. We're talking about months rather than days for some of these substances. I know or hours. I know with technology, In days, you can have experiences, transcendental experiences with these substances. You could have them in minutes or hours once you ingest them, or even seconds if it's the method or the mode of ingestion, depending on that. I know there's intravenous DMT where people have all these visions, or they'll see these crazy clowns, that are jokers, or they'll meet um, aliens, or that sort of stuff. Number three, the third one would be forced transcendence versus organic development. Psychedelics create non-earned transcendence. There is no shortcut. There's always a trade-off. There's always a drawback. Always know this. If someone offers you a shortcut, whether it's a technology, whether it's ingesting a substance, you experience states your nervous system has not been trained to integrate. This causes psychological bypassing, emotional bypassing, trauma bypassing, spiritual bypassing, identity confusion, false awakening states. True development is structural in the nervous system, emotional maturity, psychological integration. Psychedelics create a state experience, not structural development. This mismatch creates internal incoherence. It can be dangerous, because what this does is this can take you further away from the self, because the ego will have this transcendental experience. So, when you have these experiences, the adrenaline goes up, your mind gets busy, the ego gets active, then bam, you're shot, and the ego's, quiet, and it's so abrupt and strong and intense, and then you come back and the ego comes back stronger and harder. And what the ego will do is it'll take that experience one had and it'll make it its own. It'll say, oh, I'm enlightened now, oh, I am this, oh, I am this. So this little voice in the mind that is saying I am this or I am that, and it's the same with these brain training places that'll promise you these experiences. The mind will grasp onto these and hold it for its own, and that's the ego. So self-realization is knowing that you are not the mind, you are not the body, that you're the awareness within. And so when you do some of these brain training programs or psychedelics and plant medicines, the mind becomes stronger and more identified with the ego, becomes more identified with the mind and the experience. And that's a great danger. And this is what I've seen too, especially with both, but even like with people who do these brain training neurofeedback stuff, their mind has convinced them that they're self-realized or enlightened, or like they have this messiah complex and grandiosity, because we'll go over this later. There are brain patterns, brainwave patterns that have shifted and actually increased the ego. And it's very fascinating when you look at the science behind this. And then we go to the fourth, would be psychosis risk. One of the most dangerous, serious dangers is it can trigger latent schizophrenia. Psychedelics, plant medicines can trigger bipolar mania, trigger psychotic outbreaks, activate dissociative disorders, amplify paranoia, create delusional belief systems, cause persistent perceptual disorders. If you may be a risk factor if you have a family history of psychosis, trauma history, high anxiety, poor psychological integration, lack of grounding, repeated high dose usage, no integration support, identity instability. And some people, after taking these substances, never fully recover. So that's another danger. I mean, if you look at the body and the mind kind of like a computer, you could damage this and malfunction this computer and cause permanent damage. And with the natural stuff that I talk about in the book, there's none of that. It's done slowly. I mean, months is actually very fast, but compared to some of these other things, it's done slowly, and you're able to integrate it and soften the ego rather than just shatter it and destroy it abruptly. Number 5, trauma amplification or not healing. Why are people taking these substances? They're promised healing, right? They want to heal themselves. They want to be free. They want to be enlightened. But you could heal yourself without taking any of this stuff. I mean, most of the places that I've read and seen and even experienced in real life, they don't talk about trauma healing or healing in general. They just tell you to take this, and then they'll chant uh, some stuff. Like if you take ayahuasca, they chant Icaros. That's these sacred songs to help facilitate the ayahuasca experience and the healing, and they don't really go through any of these processes like forgiveness or letting go or anything like that. You can't just take a pill or take a drink and just heal yourself. It doesn't work like that. Unfortunately, mainstream society has been duped or hypnotized into taking a pill for every ill or a potion for every emotion, and it doesn't work like that. True healing does not work like that. And so psychedelics don't automatically heal trauma. They often amplify it. They remove psychological filters that normally protect the psyche. This can cause flooding, re-traumatization, emotional overwhelm, nervous system overload, panic disorders, PTSD activation, somatic memory release without containment. Without proper containment, this is destabilizing, not healing. Number 6, dissolution without integration. Integration is hugely important. It's the missing piece in most of psychedelic culture. Without integration, experiences become confusing, meaning becomes distorted, identity fragments, spiritual ideation replaces grounded psychology, symbolic hallucinations become belief systems, archetypical imagery becomes literalized. This leads to magical thinking, conspiracy ideation, false metaphysics, delusional spirituality, escapist cosmologies. And it's not to mention that, too, when you're taking like something like ayahuasca, which increases theta brainwaves, you're like in a waking, dreamlike state, and you're probably these beings that you're accessing or seeing are probably in the astral realm, and many of these things are actually trickster deities or trickster beings or entities, and so you just never know with what you're dealing with any of this stuff that produces those really vivid hallucinations, akin to like being in a dream state. Number 7, dependency and escapism. Even non-addictive psychedelics can create psychological dependency. By chasing transcendence, avoiding reality, avoiding responsibility, avoiding emotional work, you must do the work. My book and everything I talk about requires work. Sure, the framework, everything's smooth and laid out, handed to you on a platter, but you still must do the work. And if you can't do the work or don't want to do the work, then this stuff isn't for you, and maybe you have to come back another lifetime, experience more pain, maybe be born in a third world country such as India and starve to death, maybe keep coming back reincarnated with your memory wipe. But that's on you. At the very minimal, what you can do if you don't have a work mentality or work ethic is you could develop the foundational skills which will help you become successful in anything, such as being on time, such as having a positive mindset, such as having a good strong work ethic, such as embracing discomfort, and that will help you in life in anything. But that's needed here too. So if you're not willing to embrace discomfort, beyond do the work, that's absolutely needed. And so like I said, you can't just take something and expect something to magically disappear. You expect your sanskaras to magically get better, to expect your knot at the heart to magically unwind by taking something. It doesn't work like that. Also, avoiding relational work, using substances as meaning makers. This creates spiritual addiction, not freedom. Number 8, nervous system overload. Strong psychedelic experiences can overwhelm the autonomic nervous system, and they can create chronic anxiety, panic disorders, derealization, dissociation, insomnia, sensory hypersensitivity, emotional instability, and some people develop a long-term dysregulation. Cultural and ceremonial risk. Even in sacred ceremony context, there's unsafe facilitators, no psychological screening, no trauma training, no integration training, power dynamics abuse, spiritual authority manipulation, sexual misconduct, financial exploitation, group psychosis, and dynamics. Group psychosis dynamics. Ceremony does not equal safety. You hear and see all these ayahuasca ceremonies, peyote ceremonies, you name it, and they're just becoming more and more popular, and almost like it's the in thing or the cool thing to do, and really it's not doing a whole lot. I'm gonna be honest. It might help few people, like that saying, a broken clock is right twice a day, but for the most part, it really doesn't help. You know, if you go into that knowing that you're the awareness, that you're the observer of the mind and body, you're just the observer and the witness, I wonder if that would have any effect or any helpfulness, or if you went in knowing that whatever pops up, whatever emotion pops up, to let it go or to not attach to it. That may help and would be a great complement to any of these. So number 10, identity collapse without reconstruction. Ego dissolution without reconstruction leads to loss of motivation, meaning collapse, nihilism, existential anxiety, moral confusion, social disconnection, loss of purpose structures, functional impairment. The ego is not the enemy, it's the organizing structure of human functioning. Destroying it without rebuilding it is psychologically dangerous. And that's true. It's not that the ego disappears for the most part. For the majority of the population, the ego, if you're super advanced, like a Ramana Maharshi or one of those guys, the ego dissolves here in the heart. But even with Ramana Maharshi, he had to think before he spoke. He said he thought every time before he spoke. And so that's still a part of the ego. So you don't really destroy completely the ego. What you do is you disidentify with the ego or the mind as this, and with the true self, the awareness, the witness, the observer within. And so the truth is, psychedelics don't create awakening, and neither does all these brain training devices, neurofeedback, any of these things. They do not create awakening. They create the illusion of awakening. They create an experience, but they do not cause awakening. They create altered states, and that is not integrated development. They can reveal the context, but they do not build emotional maturity, build the nervous system stability, build ethical structure. And we talk about this. They don't build the heart. They may help one access the heart a little bit. I know with one, what is it, DMT or something, there's one where you feel tons of love. So maybe something like that, but they don't build like the heart. The heart's super important. That empathy, compassion, that loving kindness, all that stuff is absolutely crucial to build. And you can't just take something and build that. That takes like cultivation. It takes a little bit of time. They also don't build psychological resilience. They don't build identity coherence. They don't build relational capacity. They don't build grounded consciousness. It's not to say they're always bad, and it's not to say they don't have a therapeutic effect or value, and it's not to say they can't help anyone. It's just saying that without psychological stability, structure, integration, maturity, and support, psychedelics are destabilizing tools and not healing ones. They're amplifiers, they remove filters, and they open doors, but they don't heal, they don't build the capacity, and they don't teach the navigation. And so, Yeah, that's that's a long video on psychedelics. I just wanted people to know this before they go out there and start trying all these substances. And let's read real quick what Ramana Maharshi said about these substances. He said he advised against the use of drugs, of alcohol and tobacco, and viewed them as obstacles to genuine spiritual progress and self-realization. He taught that these substances offer only temporary, artificial, and often detrimental experiences that hinder the necessary work of subduing the mind through self-inquiry. Self-inquiry is absolutely foundational, absolutely foundation, even to the other two methods I talk about, like letting go and the forgiveness. Self-inquiry has to be included in all of this. I don't know of any really great awakened person these days. Even Eckhart Tolle talks about self-inquiry. Even Osho, even Vishrant, all these guys, they always talk about self-inquiry is absolutely vital. Some of the key aspects of Ramana Maharshi's views on drugs and intoxication. He explained that those who use drugs or alcohol are unconsciously seeking the blissful, thoughtless state of the real self. However, this is only a temporary imitation or glimpse, not true lasting realization. And remember the quote, he said that man's search for happiness is an unconscious search for the self. So it makes sense that people who use these substances are actually unconsciously seeking this blissful, thoughtless state of the real self. He also said they're a hindrance to meditation. He explicitly stated that no drug can promote true meditation. He warned that if drugs are used, the user would be unable to meditate without taking it habitually. And, this reminds me of some yogis in India, some sadhus. They take exogenous substances and they'll smoke hashish or hash or marijuana, and they'll have to continuously take this and ingest these substances. And so it is not recommended to do that. Addiction and the fall. Ramana Maharshi warned that all artificial stimulants, there must be a fall, where the craving for the substance returns even stronger. Users risk becoming addicts and slaves to the substance. He viewed tobacco as a poison. He described it as a poison and stated it is better to do without it. Instead of chemicals, he emphasized self-inquiry and moderation in food, sleep, and speech as a safe and effective path to liberation. He noted that a subtle essence in all food, including drinks and substances, affects the mind, and therefore pure sattvic habits are recommended for those seeking to realize the self. In essence, Ramana Maharshi taught that real, permanent peace is found within through self-inquiry, where drugs and alcohol offer a shallow, dangerous, and temporary escape. 100%. And he recommended self-inquiry. I added forgiveness and letting go methods. And you could add recapitulation on that as well, in addition to self-inquiry, to amplify the time to self-realization. It could enhance it. Rather than years, many years, it could take months. So it just depends on the person, on you who's doing it, how much effort and time one puts into it. At the very minimum, I would suggest just going through life, at the very beginning, just cultivating that compassion, loving kindness, and the Brahma Viharas we always talk about, and becoming, practicing and cultivating awareness in everyday life. You could, when you get angry or you feel a heightened emotional response, wait 60 to 90 seconds and just observe it and watch it come and go as your body reacts and your mind gets busy. You could go through life just doing the opposite or different things than what you're normally used to. Like, instead of turning right, turn left out your driveway and go a different way. You could freeze in the middle of an action and just freeze and observe and become immersed in awareness. There's a lot of stuff you could do. We'll talk about this later. It's a topic for another video. And that's it. That's enough for now. All right, guys, thank you for being here. Have a wonderful day or night, wherever you may be, and take care.